Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Saturday, March 16th. Today is day 162 since October 7th. Some updates on the truce deal. Hamas presented their counterproposal to Israel, and Netanyahu rejected their proposal. And so negotiators are back to the drawing board. The deal included staged release of hostages for a large number of Palestinian prisoners, and the proposal suggested a permanent ceasefire and full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and that would be decided after the first exchange, and that all remaining hostages would be released after that. We've been saying all along that Hamas has been uncompromising on saying that a permanent ceasefire would have to be a part of those negotiations. Israeli officials dismissed the proposal. Netanyahu said that these were unrealistic demands, but he did say that he would continue to send people back to the negotiating table. The first Friday of Ramadan has passed without incident at Al-Aqsa. Tens of thousands of Palestinian worshippers participated in the first Friday prayers of Ramadan at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem. There have been concerns of unrest around the prayers. Hamas had made some incitement, some statements. There were also threats by the National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, but prayers were held peacefully, both at Al-Aqsa Mosque and also the surrounding area. According to some analysts, they said these were not only the quietest Friday Ramadan prayers in years, but also the calmest Friday in Jerusalem's Old City since the Israel's war against Hamas began on October 7th. So the quiet was further evidence of what Israeli experts and defense establishment professionals, as well as Palestinian officials, have been saying all along, that tensions around the holy site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque originate with the restrictions imposed, by Israeli police. And they said that these restrictions are seen as a threat to the status of Muslims in the Old City of Jerusalem, and that tensions will reduce if those restrictions are eased. Last night, there was another report of an additional 20 people killed who were seeking aid in central Gaza. This is the third or fourth, it might even be the fifth incident. We've seen this happen time and time again where there's such desperate need for food. Aid trucks come in. I don't know the specifics of this incident, but the health ministry in Gaza says that Israeli forces killed 20 people waiting for aid. The Israeli military denies the report and says that 8 people were killed in a separate incident. But the United Nations Human Rights Office responded and said that it deplores the recent spate of killings of Palestinians that are waiting to access aid deliveries in the midst of Israel's bombardment of the Strip. And that was, of course, in response to these 20 people being killed. In addition to those killed, there were 150 people injured in that incident. The United Nations said that Israel, as the occupying power, has the duty to the fullest extent of the means available to it to ensure the provision of food, medical care for the population commensurate with their needs. If it's unable to provide these, Israel has the obligation to facilitate humanitarian relief activities, including ensuring the conditions of safety required for such activities. Doing so is becoming even more urgent given the spread of starvation in Gaza, especially in Gaza City and in North Gaza, where at least 27 people, mostly children, have already reported to have died from dehydration and malnutrition. Also, Netanyahu's office did announce they now have plans for a full ground invasion into Rafah. Those plans were approved. That's where there's more than 1 million people who've been displaced. Netanyahu's office said that the Israeli army is preparing for those operations. It could take weeks or longer for those preparations to be ready to go. There was no timeline given for the assault. And Joe Biden has called an attack on Rafah a red line if undertaken without sufficient precautions to protect civilians. And this is something where news has been inconsistent, and what we've been hearing from the White House has been inconsistent about whether or not the Biden administration would take action. Politico had that article that said, arms could be conditional on whether or not Israel would attack Rafah. And it's been about whether or not civilians would be protected. There also is a plan that there would be protection zones that could shelter a huge number of civilians to be evacuated from the city before any assault. The concern is there's no place for them to be evacuated to. Where are they going to go? One of the big concerns about the U.S.'s plan to put in a pier is the fear that Palestinians will be shipped out of Gaza and then would never be allowed to return. And also, the U.S. requires that there be a plan to protect civilians. Well, what does that mean? Most of the world would say that Gazans right now have not been protected. There are more than 31,000 dead and 72,000 injured. And Israel's saying we're doing everything we can to protect civilians. And so this is just not good enough. At the UN, a US-backed UN Security Council draft resolution that supports diplomatic efforts for an immediate ceasefire in exchange for the release of all hostages held by Hamas was circulated on Thursday as Hamas issued its ceasefire proposal back to Israel. The Associated Press talked about this US-backed resolution where it unequivocally supports international diplomatic efforts to establish an immediate and sustained ceasefire as a part of a deal to release hostages. A lot of people have been really excited about the U.S. supporting this resolution. Honestly, all this is saying is they support a temporary ceasefire that would provide the conditions to allow for a permanent ceasefire to be agreed upon. So it's like taking advantage of the window of opportunity from a temporary ceasefire to then have a more permanent cessation of hostilities. So people are saying this is a shift in U.S. policies. I don't see it being that way. I still would say to the U.S., put your money where your mouth is. So there have been a lot in the activist community saying that this is a win, that this is showing a shift in U.S. policies. And I would say it's too early to see. In Chicago, Muslim leaders have refused to meet with President Biden. More than 40 Muslim, Palestinian, and Arab American leaders in Chicago made this decision to not meet with White House officials, citing Israel's war on Gaza. They also sent a letter to the White House saying that there's no point to meet because they've already made clear their demands for a permanent ceasefire to the administration. They said, we believe another meeting would only whitewash months of White House inaction, followed by meek handouts. We're interested in serious action. In February, Palestinian Americans had also rejected an invitation to have a roundtable discussion with the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, because they felt like it was a box-ticking exercise. That's important, that Chicago meeting, because Illinois' primary is next week. I talked previously about Senator Chuck Schumer. He's the Senate Majority Leader. He's the highest elected Jewish official in U.S. history. He had made comments last week saying that Netanyahu has lost his way and that he's allowing his own political survival to take precedence over the best interest of Israel. He experienced a lot of backlash about those comments from the Israeli government, who said that his words, contrary to his words, the Israeli public supports a total victory over Hamas, and that the Israeli public rejects any international dictates to establish a Palestinian, quote, terrorist state, end quote, that the people in Israel oppose the return of the Palestinian Authority to Gaza. They said Senator Schumer is expected to respect Israel's elected government, to not undermine it. This is always true, but especially in wartime. The Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell also criticized Schumer, saying Israel is not a colony of America whose leaders serve at the pleasure of a party in power in Washington. Only Israel's citizens have a say who runs their government. Either we respect their decisions or we disrespect their democracy. And then the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who has refused to allow a vote on the military assistance package, despite it being passed in the Senate, said that Schumer's remarks were highly inappropriate and accused him of playing a divisive role in Israeli politics. It's important to note that Biden was a little bit more neutral in his response to Schumer's comments. I did not write down the specific quote from President Biden, but he said something like, I think a lot of Americans would agree with Schumer's perspective. So there's a lot riding on who we elect as our government officials. I mean, that should go without saying, of course, but we should pray that all government and global political leaders would use their authority for the good of all humanity, to make decisions that preserve human life rather than taking it away, to support life instead of killing. And let's continue to call for a comprehensive ceasefire, particularly in the days ahead, so that Gaza might see the relief that it so desperately needs.